Today, when we think of Edvard Grieg, our image of him is cast in the monochrome palette of old age. A small man with silver grey hair and a bushy moustache. His surname sounds Scottish, but he is famously and emphatically Norwegian. Grieg's signature works include the Pear suites and his only piano concerto, a work composed when Grieg was 25, and one that's become a staple of piano competitions and the concert stage. No pianist played Grieg's concerto more than Australia's Percy Grainger. And no pianist was as highly regarded by Grieg as Percy Grainger. Grieg expressed powerful feelings for Grainger. He loved him, Grieg wrote, as if he were a young woman. Grieg kept a meticulous diary, and both men were prolific letter writers. So the story of their friendship and its impact on their lives can be told in their own words.
Dear Percy Grainger, thank you for your letter. Let me say it right away. I like you. I like your healthy, wholesome view of art, your unspoiled nature, which even high life has not been able to destroy.
Dear Master, no, it was all too lovely to get the long, sweet letter from you. How kind it is of you to spare me so much time. I am inexpressibly happy to have the two lovely letters from you. 1,000 thanks.
While Grainger is remembered more for his exotic peccadillos like self-flagellation, Grieg remains the most popular composer Norway has produced. Edvard Grieg was born in Bergen, Norway's second city, in 1843, the fourth child of Alexander and Gesine Grieg. Gesine taught her son the piano. Edvard left home when he was 15 to further his musical studies in Leipzig at the insistence of a famous relative, the violin virtuoso, composer, and Norwegian folk hero Ole Bull. During his studies at the Leipzig Conservatory, Edvard distinguished himself as a pianist and, more significantly, as a composer by writing works that continue to be played today. However, he contracted pleurisy and never regained the use of his left lung. Poor health would stalk him for the rest of his life. Edvard married his first cousin, Nina Hagerup, when he was 24. Despite an unhappy marriage, they toured together, performed together, and exhilarated audiences with their intimate understanding of each other's art. But Edvard was the superstar, with an enormous following throughout Scandinavia and the rest of Europe. In England, where his 6 tours were grand successes, he was idolised. Even Queen Victoria was an admirer. And it was in London, on what was to be his final tour of England, that Edvard Grieg met Australia's musical prodigy, Percy Grainger. Of all the people Grieg met during his lifetime, none was as eccentric as George Percy Grainger. Their friendship, begun 16 months before Grieg's death, was founded on mutual admiration and respect. For Grainger, the devotion lasted another 45 years. Born in Melbourne in 1882, Grainger lived most of his life in America. He saw himself principally as a composer and modestly rated his talents above Grieg, Mozart, Tchaikovsky, and even Beethoven, whom he despised. In a bizarre musical hierarchy of his own devising, Grainger ranked himself number 9. Yet Grainger's best-known work is Country Gardens, a melodic piece of English whimsy he arranged in 1918, the same year he took American citizenship. Despite his ambitions, Grainger's fame hinged entirely on his abilities at the keyboard, where he was very, very good. In 1895, Percy's mother Rose escaped the philandering husband who'd given her syphilis and took their prodigiously talented son to Frankfurt to study music at the Hoch Conservatory. 6 years later, Rose and Percy headed to England. Percy played for wealthy Londoners in exclusive at-home soirees to help make ends meet. He became, in his words, a male whore, with mother's approval. A certain Mrs. Lilith Lowry, a 40-something socialite, described by Grainger as having a stunning body with plenty of bosom, could not resist the 20-year-old Percy. Charmed by the Australian's film star looks, English accent and pianistic brilliance, she stole his virginity and repaid him with introductions to her wide circle of friends, who ensured his many talents were put to good use. Not long after arriving in England, and despite his growing popularity at the keyboard, Grainger was looking around for something new. He began to transcribe English, Scottish and Irish folk songs. In early 1905, Herman Sandby, a Danish cellist and admirer of Percy Grainger from their earlier days in Frankfurt, did what good friends do. He passed on the scores of some of Grainger's arrangements to the biggest musical star Sandby knew, Edvard Grieg. And Grieg liked what he saw. He sent Grainger an autographed photograph with a complimentary note commending his splendid folk song settings for mixed voices. Grainger responded from Sloane Square in a letter dated April 14th.
Dear Master, I cannot begin to tell you with what deep joy and surprise I received your picture. Nor can I thank you for your very great goodness in writing me the friendly words on it. I am exceedingly happy and proud that you don't think badly of me. We imagine that there is something in our race which is not without kindred with the Norwegian, and perhaps not least because your glorious creations catch hold of us so much more irresistibly than, for example, German art could ever do.
Percy's autographed portrait was attached. Opening the letter, Grieg could hardly miss the appended eye candy, despite his interest in attractive younger women. The Australian, meanwhile, couldn't believe his luck, confiding in a letter to Sandby,
If Grieg really does think the least good of my settings, which I expect is a lie, it's very sweet that he should return ever such a fraction of my own unspeakable admiration for him.
In March the following year, Grieg embarked on another of his exhausting tours of Europe, after giving 3 concerts in Norway's capital. He then sailed to England with Nina, arriving in London on the evening of Thursday, May the 10th. He'd been engaged to play 2 afternoon concerts in Queen's Hall for a fee of 200 guineas. The Griegs stayed in Mayfair with the boss of the Queen's Hall Orchestra, Edgar Speyer, and his wife Leonora. They asked Edvard if there was anyone in London he wished to meet. The young composer from Australia, Percy Grainger, came the reply. "4 days after arriving in England, the 63-year-old Norwegian finally met the 24-year-old Australian whose folk song arrangements and autographed photograph he had admired a year earlier. Percy described the occasion in a letter to one of his future lovers, the Danish pianist Karen Holten.
Dear Karen, since I last wrote, many things have taken place. Have you seen Grieg and his wife? Can you think of anything more triumphant than the impression of these two small people? They are so completely happy together and both so lovable and kind. I played 3 of the Schlotter for him, and he took a kindly attitude to it. Was very pleased and said that I was quite the first who played it, as no one else dared to.
Grieg must have been pleased. The very next day he responded to a lunch invitation from the newly appointed Norwegian ambassador, Fridtjof Nansen.
If you wish to do something to please me, do invite a brilliant young musician from Australia, Mr. Percy Grainger, 14 Upper Cheney Row, Chelsea Southwest, whom I got to know yesterday. He is crazy about Norway, speaks Norwegian and knows everything, the sagas, Faroese literature, Björnson, Ibsen, etc. He will be happy to shake your hand. We hope to see you on the 19th. Shall we say 1:30?
The following afternoon, Grieg conducted Speye's Queen's Hall Orchestra, playing the first Pear Gynt suite. The Danish pianist Johanna Stockmar then played his concerto. The concert coincided with Norway's National Day, May the 17th. Grainger was in the audience with his mother and his friend Herman Sandby. The Australian was starstruck, telling Holten,
Never have I experienced anything half so moving and uplifting. I must say it was a happy day for me, and it was the same for Mother and Herman. I think Grieg conducts excellently with much individuality and many capital and unusual effects. Pear Gynt, of course, went splendidly. Remember to remind me to tell you many amusing things about Grieg and the Spears. He doesn't care much for many people and lets them see it.
When lukewarm reviews of his concert appeared in the London papers, Grieg blamed a surly press to whom he had refused interviews. The reaction of the audience, however, was quite different. Or so he wrote in his diary.
Thunderous reception, increasing warmth as the concert progressed. Enormous enthusiasm at the end. The Lyric Suite and Pear Gynt Suite No. 1 went exceptionally well. So did the whole concert, as a matter of fact. I am happy about having gotten through it so well.
Grainger joined his hero and a group of Norwegians for the ambassador's lunch at the Bachelors' Club in Hamilton Place. Meanwhile, an elegantly engraved invitation arrived at Grainger's Chelsea home, requesting his attendance for an at-home recital in honour of the Griegs at the Speyers' residence. Percy's performance was to be the climax of the evening. He had 2 days to prepare. Grainger was more than a little familiar with Grieg's music. Growing up in Brighton, Victoria, Percy had listened to his mother Rose playing Grieg and was not impressed. But as a teenager studying at the Hoch Conservatory in Frankfurt, Grainger became fascinated by the Norwegians' harmonic innovations and contemporary style. He mastered Grieg's Slåtter, or peasant dances, and his Norwegian peasant songs, works few, if any, pianists played publicly. Later in London, 19-year-old Grainger made his solo debut performing Grieg's Ballade at the Steinway Hall, a technically demanding work the composer wrote the year both his parents died, a work Grieg never played in public. Now, on a cool and cloudy spring evening in 1906, the 24-year-old colonial was to be the final act in a glittering occasion before 200 members of London's high society and the acclaimed composer in whose honour they had gathered. Grainger made his appearance just before midnight.
Lastly, Percy Grainger played two of the Norwegian peasant dances in a dazzling manner. Yes, he is brilliant, that's for sure. I am happy about having gained a young friend such as he. We got to bed at 2 a.m. I say, once and never again. This was for our kind host and hostess as thanks for their hospitality. But polite society, to hell with it.
Grieg had been in London 10 days that were crammed with lunches, dinners, recitals, visits to the opera, rehearsals and performances. There were 10 more days to go. And just like today's superstars, he was mobbed by his fans.
I was nearly smothered by young folks, mainly females, who held out programs and pencils in order to get my autograph. I hurriedly did what I could, but I had to leave most of them in the lurch.
Grieg's status as a composer had been greatly enhanced thanks to a chance meeting with a writer and fellow Norwegian in Rome when he was 22. 9 years after that meeting, the writer suggested Grieg compose incidental music for the production of a new play. The playwright was Henrik Ibsen. The play, Peer Gynt. Peer Gynt was controversial. Hans Christian Andersen described it as something wild and unwholesome. It took Grieg 12 months to complete Ibsen's task. The 2 orchestral suites he arranged from the longer work helped establish Grieg's reputation all over the world. Now in London, and with less than 24 hours before his next concert, Grieg received word of Ibsen's death.
Although I was prepared for it, the news came as a blow. How much I owe him, poor, great Ibsen.
After a sleepless night, a dejected Grieg prepared for his final concert in Queen's Hall. It would be his last public performance on English soil.
At noon, I took 3 drops of opium, and at 3 p.m., as I was driving to the concert, I already had a feeling of reduced nervousness. To my inexpressible joy, I noted increasing relaxation during the demanding concert. The cello sonata with Hugo Becker went well. Thereafter, then I played Mountaineer's Song, which made quite a hit, and Wedding Day at Trollhaugen, which caused a real storm. After 3 curtain calls, I had to give an encore, and I chose Cradle Song.
Grainger sat next to Grieg, turning pages for him as he played. To Grieg's dismay, they were unable to be together at dinner afterwards.
I missed the marvellous Percy Grainger, who turned pages for me at the concert, and whom I love as if he were a young woman. It is a dangerous thing to be strongly admired, but when one admires in return, as I do in this case, that evens it out. I have not met anyone who understands me as he does. And he's from Australia. So what is there to this reproach by the honorable critics to the effect that my music is too Norwegian? It is stupidity and ignorance, and that is all.
Inside Queen's Hall, the concert had been an outstanding success. Yet reviewers, one of whom called Grieg a grey-haired elf, commented on his weakened technique. The next morning, Grieg woke up with bronchitis. Grainger paid him a visit the following evening.
Grainger is remarkable. He played and sang English folk songs with brilliant harmonizations. Here are the beginnings of a new English national style. Unfortunately, the bronchitis feeling will not go away.
Grieg had only 4 days left in the English capital. He asked the Speyers to invite his newfound Australian friend to another dinner at their home. Before that, he had an appointment at Buckingham Palace. Edward VII, whom Grieg had heard described as the most unmusical Englishman of all, surprised him with a request to perform.
What could I do? Into the music room where I attacked a Bechstein, and remembering the Queen's deafness, I pounded away at the minuet from the piano sonata. So what happened? The king who sat beside Nansen began quite calmly to converse aloud with him. This happened just before the trio, so I paused at this point and looked questioningly over toward the king, who answered my questioning look with a broad smile. Then I continued. But God help me, the same thing occurred all over again. Now I got angry. I made a longer pause that, according to what Nansen said later, he understood and took to heart. It is pretty rude to request music and then act like that.
Grieg's last day in England began with a lunch in his honour. Although he didn't like the food and described a serenade by 2 military men as unbearable, the day ended better than it began.
I spent my last evening in London at home with Miss Stockmark, Percy Grainger and Herman Sandby. Our host and hostess were out, and we acted as if it were our home. First we had a fine dinner with 3 or 4 servants, then coffee and music in the library. Fate decreed that on this day I would hear the cello sonata for the second time, as Grainger and Sandby wanted to hear my opinion of their interpretation of it. Their performance was excellent from beginning to end. There were things that Grainger got much more out of than I myself did, and on the whole, I got a good lesson. It isn't often that I have an opportunity for that kind of learning.
Grainger ended the soirée playing more of Grieg's Slotter.
There's no Norwegian pianist at the moment who can match him, and that is significant in more ways than one. It shows that we still do not have a Norwegian pianist who has enough understanding to tackle such challenges. It also shows that if this understanding does not exist where it ought to, namely Norway, then it can be found elsewhere. Yes, even in Australia, where the marvellous Percy Grainger was born.
Grieg gave Grainger an autographed collection of his songs. Grainger returned to arranging folk songs and made his first recording of some of them on an Edison Bell phonograph. Grieg travelled home via Copenhagen, where he gave an interview to a Danish newspaper.
There's one artist whose help I must not forget, Percy Grainger. He is a young man of genius, possessing a real artist's soul. Although born in Melbourne, Australia, he talks Norwegian and is full of enthusiasm for our land and our art. Such a man as we must love. At an at-home given in my honor, he played some of the Norwegian slotted that I have arranged for piano, with a mastery that awakened universal admiration. I mention this as these slotter are so difficult and unusual that only the bravest can tackle them. Although Percy Grainger did not perform at my concert in Queen's Hall, he assisted me by turning over my music. But just this, to know him near me, with his sympathy and understanding, created an atmosphere that seemed to uplift me.
Kjæreste Dr. Grieg. Dearest Dr. Grieg, a pupil of mine has sent me Vortland with your interview. How like you it is to be so friendly to me. It is all too kind to write all the lovely things about me and has made me indescribably happy. Not only that it came in the interview, but most of all that you really think these nice things. I must say that your visit here was the loveliest time I have ever experienced. We all long for you to come again soon. I hope that both you and Mrs. Grieg are very well, and that the journey wasn't too Pfingst-like. I'm practicing at present wedding day at Trollhaugen, and 2, for me, new Schlotter. Believe me, I can't say how grateful and happy I feel for all the goodness you both have done for me.
Kjære Percy Grainger, takk for deres brev. Dear Percy Grainger, thank you for your letter. Let me say it right away. I like you. I like your healthy, wholesome view of art, your unspoiled nature, which even high life has not been able to destroy, and also your deep feeling for the folk song and all the possibilities it carries within its bosom. But when shall we meet again? My sun is already low in the western sky, so it better happen soon. I am sure the scenery of West Norway will thrill you. It is full of musical motives that each person can make use of in his own way. It is lying here in its majestic tranquility and waiting for you. But you must come while you are young and receptive. Later it will be too late. I am still living on the powerful impressions of my youth.
Dear Master, I have just heard from Sir Charles Stanford that you will be coming over again to visit this land next fall, and that I will have the joy of hearing you conduct at the Leeds Festival. How lovely it will be to see you and dear Mrs. Grieg again, and to hear it all.
Dear Percy Grainger, if you were to get a letter from me each time we talk about you, it would be too much for you. But my failing is at the opposite extreme, and that is the result of old age. Letter writing is hard work when one is 63 years old. It's great that we are coming to Leeds next autumn. Might it not be possible if I were to include my piano concerto among the works that I shall conduct, that I could have the joy of seeing Percy Grainger as soloist? I have no idea whether concertos are performed at such a festival, or whether one must limit oneself to symphonies, overtures and choral works. Please look into this for me and tell me what you find out. The festival has one big problem, namely that it won't take place until next year. At present, I'm still capable of participating, but it's more than doubtful that I will be able to do so a year from now. Next year, you must come to Norway. The air here is wonderful and healthful. We will be staying here all winter until March, when I will be conducting at several places in Germany.
Dear Master, no, it was all too lovely to get the long, sweet letter from you. How kind it is of you to spare me so much time. I am inexpressibly happy to have the 2 lovely letters from you. 1,000 thanks. This about the Leeds Festival is enchanting. Even if your kind thought about letting me play your piano concerto doesn't come to anything, it will always be the most lovely thought for me to remember that you once wanted it. I can't at all tell you what this means to me. Yes, piano concerto. Do you mean that I could possibly come to you up in Trollhaugen next summer? If you could have me, it would indeed be glorious. But probably you don't mean that. And you mustn't tire yourself by writing an answer to this question. There is no hurry at all for me to know it. How nice for the Germans that you are going to conduct in Germany and elsewhere.
While Grainger wrote to the Leeds Festivals Committee, Grieg drafted a programme for their approval. He included the piano concerto, with the Australian as soloist.
Dear Percy Grainger, let me first and foremost take this opportunity to wish you everything good in the new year. No illness, imagination and fingers in perfect working order, and we shall meet again. Both at Trollhaugen, where you can only expect to share the simple manner of our life here, and in Leeds. Let us hope that this can come about. But I have learned from bitter experience that I cannot make a firm commitment. My health is too fragile for that. But what a joy it would be for me and my wife to see you, and even to hear you at Trollhaugen. There we could go through the piano concerto together.
Despite his poor health, Grieg was determined to keep performing. 12 days into the new year, he conducted his piano concerto in Oslo, and in March embarked on what would be his final tour to Denmark and Germany. The exhausting programme took its toll.
Dear Percy Grainger, it is unfortunately a sick man who's writing to you. I'm in a lot of pain. I was feeling relatively good when I came to Copenhagen after my concerts. In order to fully restore my health, I made use. Still, I'm counting on the peace and quiet of home, so that in July I might have the joy of seeing you with us in Trollhaugen.
In June, Grieg returned to Norway to rest, and with no desire to compose. A note from an exuberant Grainger confirmed the engagement in Leeds, and sought reassurance about the Trollhaugen invitation.
Dear Master, I hope you are really well despite your exertions in the south. How very much Do you think that you and dear Mrs. Grieg can have me at Trollhaugen this summer for a short time? Or would I be in the way this time? It would be so glorious to be with you sometime, but only if it doesn't intrude. If it should be possible that you could have me this summer, what time do you think it could be? I ask as I will arrange my other plans according to what suits you.
Grainger's loyalties, however, were being tested. He wrote to his lover, Karen Holton, in Denmark.
I feel like chucking the Grieg trip and the folk songs too, and just coming along to Schwinklov as soon as the season's over here. Of course I must go to darling Grieg, and I ought awfully to do the folk songs, but I haven't settled about the latter yet.
On the 15th of June 1907, Grieg turned 64.
Dear Percy Grainger, thank you for your friendly birthday greeting. I have been so poorly that I really have not wished for many happy returns of the day. Until a few days ago, I was quite sure that I would have to give up the pleasure of seeing you here. But during the few days I have spent here in peace and quiet, I have begun to sleep again.
Grainger arrived in Bergen early in the morning of July 25th. Writing to his mother Rose in his own bizarre form of so-called blue-eyed English, the recently turned 25-year-old Australian described his first hours in Norway as a feverish ecstasy.
Norwegians aren't lovely to look at, but blazes they're not to be done without. They would be missed. Glowing little icicles with gnomishness, all knobbly over the Norwegianest of them. Great things, enthusiasms, noble excesses without let. When I arrived in Bergen yestermorn, found it full of German men-of-warsmen. A typical teutonically out-of-tune brass band of the same allayed my national musical fears at the station. I had half an hour to gloat over the lack of smartness of the men, the convincing not to be fearedness of them, the dull-eyedness, the pimples, the rank rumps and corkscrew legs of them. I loathe them from my sincerest and best heart.
He reached the Griegs' home, Trollhaugen, in time for breakfast.
After breakfast, Grieg was for my playing some schlotter, So I got off to the Griegs' composing room down the slope near the fjord and put in a few hours' practice.
And so the tone for the next 10 days and nights was set. Music, swimming, rowing on the fjord, and more music. They took immense pleasure in each other's company.
And this enchanting, natural, deep, serious and childlike nature. To gain a young friend such as this, what a joy!
On the morning of his 5th day at Trollhaugen, Grainger finally got down to the serious business of practicing Grieg's concerto. It was a highly charged, nerve-wracking experience with the composer in the room. Shortly after the session, at midday in fact, he started writing a long letter to his mother in his distinctive vernacular, unburdening some of his understandable insecurities and neuroses, as well as some darker thoughts.
This morn, Grieg and I have gone through the piano concerto, and such a jolly time we had. He allows and delights in many of my small alterations, and says he looks forward to leads with genuine joy. He says you can do everything as regards carrying out his suggestions. Splendid, lovely all his hints are, and so tenderly offered me. I now ought, for the first time, to be able to give some sort of a feelingful voicing of this adorable work. Oh, if only I felt stronger nervously, and actual life were not such a dragon to me. After such a morn of trying hard to please the old darling, and being beswat with the bodily graft of it all, it is almost as if my brain leaves me, and I become one bag of quakings, tremblings. I'll be so glad to leave here, glorious as it all is here. I still creep about in a never-ending state of dread and funk. Dread that I might do or say some little careless thing or word to hurt his or their feelings or his health. Fear that he will suddenly ask me to show him more of my compositions, and maybe one mightn't please him, or that he'll ask me to play piano pieces of his own or of others that I don't know. How do I know that if I truthfully told Grieg that I loathe Beethoven and despise foreigners, and in my inner heart long for red war and nameless brutalities, that he wouldn't cry off my playing the concerto in Leeds? Loss at once of prestige, beside the unmeasurably deeper and never to be got over missing of his love, and the rare tender poise of now between us, old and young.
That evening, Grainger played the Brahms F minor sonata for Grieg. Then the following morning,
had a long, sweet chat with Mrs. Grieg this morn, just now. She says he said this morn, we must adopt him. She says he is very fond of me.
Later that day, master and apprentice worked together on the concerto again. Grainger made further alterations to the score. The next evening, he rowed the Griegs across the fjord for a dinner with their close friends Franz and Marie Bayer. Grainger entertained the gathering before and after the meal, playing works by Scarlatti, Bach and Chopin, before honouring Grieg with a recital of one of his slotter. Early the next morning, he wrote again to his mother.
Last night he said, after I'd been slaughtering, the Norwegian government ought to pay you to present Norway to the world. It would be worth its while. He is careful not to praise me too fulsomely, especially my compos, but sudden bursts of enthusiasm will sound forth out of a joy-glowing face.
Grainger already believed, and rightly so, that Grieg thought more highly of his pianistic ability than his composing, and that performance held the key to greatness for the young Australian. Grainger's last day at Trollhaugen was Sunday the 4th of August. He practiced the concerto in the morning, rode to the Byres, and lunched with the Griegs. After lunch, there was one final run-through of all 3 movements of the concerto for leads. The time had come to say goodbye.
Last evening we accompanied the dear Percy Grainger to the steamship that was to carry him to his mother in Denmark. What an artist, what a human being, what a high idealist, what a child, and at the same time, what a great and highly developed view of life. A socialist of the future. I do not know whom among the very best pianists I could compare him to. But all comparisons are irrelevant when one has to do with greatness. He is himself. Perhaps I'm partial to him because he has in fact realized my ideals regarding piano playing. If I had possessed his technical prowess, my perception of the essence of piano playing would have been exactly the same as his. He hovers like a god over all suffering, all struggle, but one feels that they have been there, but have been overcome. It is a human being, a great, distinguished human being who is playing. May he have a good life.
There are naturally no living and scarcely any dead musicians who mean for me what Grieg does. And to get his admiration and to see him carried away and excited about my things is quite intoxicating for me, as you can imagine. It is hard to explain, but it is almost as if I was happier for his sake than for my own. I mean, in this way, I have always felt that he had such a boundless, all-loving... It is not that I think that my compositions are such that everybody ought to like them. Not at all. But I do feel that I am a talent, and I know that I am deeply serious and honest in my attempts and work. And if Grieg had not felt that I really meant something with the whole thing, I would have felt depressed about us both. But there is no danger of that. I am so certain that he is completely aware of both my weaknesses and strengths, and that he, in any case, doesn't undervalue me.
After Grainger sailed from Bergen, Grieg wrote to his publisher.
The young Australian genius, the pianist Percy Grainger, who has recently been my guest at Trollhaugen, discovered a ridiculous bar that had got into the cadenza of the first movement, which I removed on the spot. The pianist I refer to, who is going to play, and probably more beautifully than anyone else has done, my piano concerto at the festival in Leeds, is one of the most significant pianists I have ever heard. And over and beyond that, he's an artist and a person of astonishing depth and of many-sided gifts.
To the Russian pianist and conductor Alexander Selotti, he wrote,
A short time ago, I had a visit from a young Australian. His name is Percy Grainger and he lives in London. But how he could play! I have never heard such an interpretation of Bach. And when he played my own works for me, the old Adam awoke and asked in amazement, "But is it really so beautiful what you once wrote?"
8. August 1907. Kjære Mester, August the 8th, 1907. Dear Master, now that I have been permitted to enjoy the indescribably happy time with you, I can really understand a little better how your glorious works came to be written. People's works, after all, are themselves, are they not? It is no use making an attempt to thank you for all your innumerable kindnesses and goodnesses to me. I do believe that you saw that I was indeed deeply happy the whole time with you, but who wouldn't be happy together with you? And that only sounds American when I write it like that. With warm, heartiest greetings to you all, your grateful Percy.
Trollhaugen 11. august 1907. Kjære Percy Grainger. Takk for deres brev. Trollhaugen, August 11, 1907. Dear Percy Grainger, thank you for your postcard. But above all, thank you for the days you gave us. I wanted so much to get to know you better, both as an artist and as a person, for I had the feeling that we would understand each other. And that is what happened. You have become a dear young friend to me, one who has enriched the evening of my life.
Grieg was admitted to hospital 2 weeks later, suffering from insomnia and breathlessness. After 3 days, he was back in Trollhaugen, practicing for Leeds. His response to Franz Bayer's now grave concerns about the impending tour, that the concerts would give him strength, summed up his lifelong attitude to performing. The Bayers drove into Bergen with Nina and Edvard to farewell them. Grieg was so weak, however, his doctor readmitted him to hospital. Edvard Grieg died on September the 4th from heart failure caused by emphysema. He was 64. Thousands farewelled Bergen's famous son at a state funeral. Grieg's ashes were placed in a grotto above Trollhaugen, the retreat that would forever be associated with Norway's greatest composer. Grainger played Grieg's piano concerto at Leeds the following month in memory of his great mentor. Critics hailed the Australian's performance, suggesting it was the way Grieg himself intended it to be played. Later in life, however, a self-confessed morose Grainger came to see himself as merely Grieg's disciple, claiming Sandby's introduction brought him mainly sorrow and disappointment. 32 years after meeting Grieg in London, he lamented, in his idiosyncratic language,
I had wanted to be Grieg's prophet, but instead he became my prophet. I had wanted, critically and impersonally, to proclaim the still unsuspected, far-reaching importance of Grieg's compositional innovations, but instead became his protégé. And who believes in the impersonalness and criticalness of a protégé? So, in a sense, it would have been better if I had never met the Griegs, sweet and dear though they were to me.